Good morning, students. Today we have to discuss the topic about the downfall of the Roman Empire. Means what were the factors which which led this vast and so consolidated, which vast and the so consolidated empire, Roman Empire, towards its fall and towards its declination, towards its declination. So now we see that first, if you see a lots of couple of the factors were behind the downfall of the Roman Empire. I have already mentioned this empire had expanded from most of the parts, three continents were under the control of this vast empire. The first, the first, first we say continent means the Italy, European continent, Italy, the parts of Germany, Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, and the western, the coastal banks of the Atlantic was under this control. Or in mid, we can see that towards the east in north, first of all, take the in the north. I have already mentioned that now the Rhine rivers and the Danube rivers. These two rivers were the its northern fronts, Danube rivers, and in southern, if you see its southern demarcations war, thus its empire had expanded, territorial expansion of this empire had extended up to be the Sahara Desert. Now, or if you see towards the east, we have seen that this empire empire had now extended extended up to the its border was Euphrates and the Tigris rivers in the Iran. These two rivers were the boundaries, eastern boundaries, and apart beyond that, the Iranian Empire was existing there. And okay, so this vast empire had, and we know that this empire was the empire of the diversities, means the people now having speaking the different language, people say now people having the different cultures, different language, different costumes. They lived in this vast empire. Understand? But even then, it was a very miracle for this vast empire that now the Roman rulers very strongly kept their stronghold over this empire kept there. And how this became the possible? Now we have studied that this had been possible because of their strong and efficient governors, and because of their urbanization in the different provinces. Okay, so that is the another thing. But here we have to see what the factors were. Factors now became the causes of the fall of this empire. That the first factors now, as the historians now believe that the first factor was the huge size of this Roman Empire. As I mentioned the huge size of this Roman Empire. This was itself a factors of the weakening of this empire. Why? Because the Roman Empire was so large that this was not feasible for a ruler to keep his or her a stronghold upon this vast empire. Even then, the huge now for a long time united. It was difficult if so vast empire could be kept under a strict control in the hands of a ruler. It was not possible. It was a natural. This huge empire remained integrated under the able and competent. under the competent and able ruler who were the very competent and ably or strongly they kept this empire under their control, under their but and the administered the whole vast empire very smoothly. But what about the weakers? Whenever the weakers ruler now ascended on the throne of this vast empire, now they were not capable of controlling their strict hold upon the Roman Empire. They were not. They failed to control this vast empire. And now, moreover, consequently, or as a result, its distant territory just started becoming independent. As a result, what happened? It's a distant countries now started bickering, started revolting, started the disintegrating from the central authority of the Roman Empire, or now which made its decline inevitable, or as a result, it's because as the provinces situated far from understand under a loose central government began to declare themselves agile and independent. So, because this is the reason that this vast empire okay started and its fall was inevitable. Its fall was sure. Okay. The second factors, the first factors, the vast empire. Second factors we are going to discuss here is the imperialistic policy of the Roman emperors. Now we know that Roman emperors were highly ambitious, and they had a lots of longings and the overcoming and longings for conquering the vast territories and keep under their control. So now this proved to be important factors of the decline of empire. How? Almost all the Roman emperors followed the imperialistic policy. Imperialistic policy means now grabbing and defeating the weaker nations by the exercise of the military power. Imperialistics means if a stronger nation now tries to control its command over a weaker nations to exploit its resources, so that tendency and that process is called the imperialism. So this imperialistic design and the ambitions of this Roman Empire now attack. They made the attack upon the different parts. But for that, one thing remember is their army and military might must be there. They should have the strong army. The strong army, in the maintenance of the strong army, it requires the huge expenses. It is quite clear that maintaining the strong army, having the longings for the expansion of empire, vast empire. So now this requires the army, military, or military requires the expenses, huge expenses. So now this policy they followed, and as a result, what happened? As long as now, in order to fulfill their imperialistic ambitions, it resulted in the shattering of economic conditions. Now, as the emperors made the expense the huge upon the maintaining of the army officers, and ultimately, what happened? This now affected their financial health of the empire. It means their economy began to shatter, and as a result, because of that, imperialistic policy of Roman emperors turned many other countries into the enemy. Second thing, economically, this empire became weak because the huge now income of the states were being spent on the army, maintenance of the army or the militarizations. The rest, and as well as the countries over upon which this empire invaded the country, those rulers of those country became directly or indirectly the enemies of the Roman Empire. They turned the enemy of the Roman empires. Next factors we are going to study here, the Roman empires had the grown on its military strength. Now, I have already mentioned you in your previous classes. The Roman Empire now had the three pillars. This vast empire stood on three pillars and stood on, and what the pillars were those? They stood in three pillars. First, army. Second, bureaucracy. Third, senates and the kings. These were the pillars of the Roman Empire. Understand? The army now played in ambitious state within the now so vast state. The army played a very important role. Without army, a state could not be the strong and could not be the annexed the more and more territories. So that's the this army. Roman state functions well till the army functions well. Roman state, this was the military state. As long as the Roman state, the army functions well, the state remained well, stood well, consolidated. But as the army weakened by the passage of the time, always one thinks, always one can't be the state stronger. This is the process of the history. This is the process of history that now the climax, fall and downfall, rise and downfall. This is the cycle of the history. So now, as long as the army remained stronger, the empires was now stable. But as the army became the weaker, the empire now had a lots of challenge to keep it stable. The moreover, in the beginning, the Romans got themselves enlisted in the army in the large number of. Slowly, they lost interest in that. Therefore, soldiers from alien countries. So the Romans had the very interest in the beginning. The Italians and the Rome and around the Italy, they had the very much interest. The people were now recruited in the army. Understand? But they lost the interest by the passage of the time. And as they lost the interest, so the Roman Empire had to recruit the army from the other provinces, far-flung provinces which were under this control. And as a result, what happened? Because as a result, this army, army constituted the armed force constituted of the far-flung provinces lacked the patriotism like the Romans. Lacked the patriotism. They belong to the different provinces and the different cultures. So they had no so much interest or the feeling of the patriotism amongst them. So that's why this army lacked the patriotism. They proved to be the cause of weakness in place of strength. In place of strength, they now proved to be the cause of the weakness of the empire. Therefore, the decline of empire became the inevitable. Now, students, we shall see the next point to be here. Weak economic condition played the vital role. Now we know that in the vast Roman Empire, the weak economic conditions. How the Roman Empire's economic conditions became the so weak? It was the reason of that now this vast Roman Empire had a very vast organization of the bureaucracy, the vast army, maintenance of army, civil servants. The state had this vast Roman state had to spend a lot of money over the maintenance of the army, as well as the so vast so vast structure of the bureaucracy. So civil servants, bureaucrats, the army had to spend upon that. Now the state had to make a expenditure. So as a result, what happened? The financial conditions weakened, and moreover, and the possibilities of further expansions were exhausted by the second century AD. On the other hand, protection of the empire became now costlier because the growing. Later on, this I have already mentioned that many of the tribals, now German tribals, they crossed the Rhine, the Visigoths, Vandals, and Swords. These tribals now started attacking from the crossing the Danube, by crossing the Danube rivers, Rhine river, understand? And the Germans area where the threatened. As a result, what happened? The Roman Empire had to maintain and make the expenditure much more upon the maintaining of the army to meet this menace, which were the from the other side, from the tribals. They were threatening the state. So as a result, to maintain this use, this became the necessary for the state and imperative for the state to impose the tax upon the common man. As the huge tax, already common man was burdened with the tax, this huge tax. So now this process and the huge tax upon the common man now led towards the breakdown of the Roman Empire. Financial strength they lost, and lots of threats from the different parts of the different parts. But this now, no doubt, made the weaker. The next thing is that transfer of capital from the Rome to Constantinople. This was the big incident and in the history of the Roman Republic. The transfer of the capital from Rome to and now we know that this vast empire was divided in the two parts. Eastern part was known as the Byzantine Empire, and it had the capital at the Constantinople. Understand? And the its western part of the Roman Empire was ruled under the seat of capital, the Rome, at the Rome. So this vast empire was divided, and this new capital, which was made, has been the now Emperor Constantine. We know that Constantine had made this capital. So in his name, the name of the capital was given Constantinople, and moreover, it was situated near the Black Sea. This Constantinople was situated near the Black Sea, and moreover, and the changes that capital proved troublesome to the empire because of its very difficult to protect the Rome from them. So as this capital center was changed, so after that, the Rome seat of administration as the capital. Rome became the very weaker, and it was situated. This capital was situated on the sea bank, coastal area. So, and Rome was, it was very difficult for the Rome to protect itself from the from these invasions. So we see that this vast empire, this transfer of capital, the division of empire in the two capitals, it also proved in the further decades proved to be the weakness of the empire. The next students, now Theosodius, another problem that arisen. This was the problem of the Theosodius. After the demise of Theosodius, what happened in 395? He divided the Roman Empire into the into his two sons. Now the Arcadius and the Honorius, the two sons, his empire was completely divided into two sons, and this partition resulted into the weakness of empire in some ways. And this was no doubt. One thing as always remember, sovereignty never divides. This was the notion of the medieval times that if the sovereignty and a state is divided, this makes the weaker. This is there must be the fall of that state. As the two brothers later on, now a jealousy and the bitterness cropped up between the two brothers, and this became the one and the now this led this vast Roman Empire towards the weaknesses and towards the fall. And this next, in the opinion of some historians, slave crisis. I have already mentioned in the further previous classes was that slave crisis. The Roman economy was completely based on the agricultural factories, manufacturing economy was there. Manufacturers, agriculture, this. And now, who were deployed? Who were working force? The slaves were working force there. But after the after a later Romans, now we see that the Augustine and after the Trajan, the Roman emperors left the policy of expansion. They left. As they left the policy of expansion, so what happened there? As they left it, now the Roman, the captives, the number of captives reduced. The number of the slaves began to reduce. How the slaves were supplied? The mostly during the war period, as the war was going on. So in those wars, the captives were brought, and they, as slaves, they were deployed in the different establishment and the different in agriculture, in the industries and manufacturing. Understand? So this supply of slaves now lacked and reduced by the passage of the time. Yet this supply now fallen. As a result, this created the slaves crisis in the Rome. Understand? Not only the Roman Empire. Why? Because the vast empire was based on the working force of the slaves. So as a result, what happened? Now, as a result, the prices of slaves rising. Slaves were now purchased or exchanged like the commodities. Slaves. This slaves purchasing prices now rose. So as a result, what happened? What happened? How the employers now realize the work? They now laid the much work upon the slaves, increasing level of exploitation of the slaves. And now how? In the beginning, high cost of the purchasing slaves was balanced by increasing the level of exploitation of the slaves. Much work was given. One man work, now two men's work began to be the laden on the one man. And by this, they began to balance their expenditure and balance their price. And moreover, but it was not possible beyond a certain point because most of the agricultural slaves were already living much below the basic subsistence. This could be the not done much more beyond because already they were the laden with the huge and heavy works in the agricultural field. Moreover, thus the Roman economy also came under the crisis because of slaves crisis. Economic crisis led the decline of this vast empire. Slaves crisis, economic crisis led towards the vast decline of this vast empire. And now, next, in opinion of lack of the well-organized navy. Now, Roman Empire was now this was surrounded by the three sides the siege. Understand? So now, but the Roman Empire did not maintain the any navy. There must have been the naval forces to reproof and to drive out the enemies. But the Roman Empire's most important weakness they had. The Romans did not maintain the strong naval power, and that was necessary. So later on, the attacks from the seashore, they could not control these attacks. They could not defend these attacks of the. So this was the another reason of the falling of the Roman Empire. And now, moreover, provincial provincials, I have already said, at the central government weakened, the state governments and the provincial governments now started the revolting against. And now, or later on, we see that many revolts came from the Spain or Britain, which were under the control of this vast Roman Empire. So now they protested and began many of the states started declaring themselves as independent from the central authority. Moreover, economic condition of empire became the very more rules could not be the pay much attention towards the administration. So this was the causes of the fall of the. To show the many challenges the central authority now had to face from the states. So this was also a tendency of the towards the downfall of the Roman Empire. More invasion of the barbarians. I have already mentioned. These barbarian attacks started. Attacks of the Vandals, attacks of the Visigoths, attacks of the Visigothics, attacks of the Burgundians, Ostrogoths, and moreover the Vandals. These all tribes from the Danube River, Rhine rivers, understand, they began to attack, and Rome was sacked and robbed many times. These tribes attack on the Rome, and Rome, beautiful city. It was robbed by these tribes. So this was not. We have not to tell much. What the conditions the Rome, this vast empire, even could not defend a city, very important capital city. They could not defend this. As a result, this was the much to speak, not to speak much, that these conditions became the Roman Empire. Up to this extent, this empire became the weak and now became the subject of the fall. Understand? The now students, today this is the much for that. Now the next day, from the next day period, we shall start the Islamic lands. Understand? The next new chapters I will start. Thank you very much for attending the class.